Welcome back, guys. Chapter 12. Roy was exhausted. It seemed like 100 years ago that Dana Matherson had tried to strangle him inside the janitor's closet, but it had happened only that afternoon. "Thanks. Now we're even," Beatrice Leap said. "Maybe," said Roy. They were waiting in the emergency room of the Coconut Cove Medical Center, which was more of a large clinic than a hospital. It was here they'd brought Beatrice's stepbrother after carrying him upright for almost a mile, each of them bracing one of his shoulders. "He's going to be all right," Roy said. For a moment he thought Beatrice was about to cry. He reached over and squeezed her hand, which was noticeably larger than his. He's a tough little cockroach," Beatrice said with a sniffle. "He'll be okay." A woman dressed in baby blue scrubs and wearing a stethoscope approached them. She introduced herself as Dr. Gonzalez. "Tell me exactly what happened to Roy," she said. Beatrice and the real Roy exchanged glances. "Why was it left for you to bring your stepbrother here? Where are your parents?" "Working," Beatrice replied. "Didn't you call and tell them there was a medical emergency?" They crew on a crab boat. No phone." Not bad, Roy thought. The doctor, however, wasn't buying it. "It's hard to understand," she said to Beatrice, "how your stepbrother could go missing for so long and nobody in the family got concerned enough to call the police." "Sometimes he runs away from home," Beatrice said quietly, "and he doesn't come back for a while." It was the closest thing to a true answer that she'd given, and ironically, it was the one that made Dr. Gonzalez back off. "I'm going to go check on Roy now," she told them. "In the meantime, you two might want to polish up your story." "How's he doing anyway?" Beatrice asked. "Better. He got a tetanus shot, and now we're loading him with antibiotics and pain medication. It's strong stuff, so he's pretty sleepy." "Can we see him?" "Not right now." As soon as the doctor had gone, Roy and Beatrice hurried outside where it was safer to talk. Roy sat down on the steps of the emergency room. Beatrice remained standing. "This isn't going to work, cowgirl. Once they figure out he's not you..." "It's a problem," Roy agreed. "The understatement of the year. And if Lana hears about this, you know he'll end up in juvie detention," Beatrice said gloomily, "until she finds a new military school, probably some far-off place like Guam where he can't run away." Roy didn't understand how a mother could kick her own child out of her life, but he knew such tragic things occurred. He'd heard of fathers who acted the same way. It was depressing to think about. "We'll come up with something," he promised Beatrice. "You know what, Tex? You're okay." She pinched his cheek and went bounding down the steps. "Hey, where are you going?" he called after her. "Fix dinner for my dad. I do it every night." "You're kidding, right? You're not really leaving me here alone." "Sorry," Beatrice said. "Dad'll freak out if I don't show up. He can't make toast without burning off his fingertips." "Couldn't Lana cook his dinner this one time?" "Nope, she tends bar at the Elks Lodge." Beatrice gave Roy a brisk little wave. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Don't let him operate or nothing on my brother." "Wait," Roy jumped to his feet. "Tell me his real name. It's the least you can do after everything that's happened." "Sorry, cowgirl, but I can't. I made him a blood promise a long time ago." "Please?" "If he wants you to know," Beatrice said, "he'll tell you himself." Then she ran off, her footsteps fading into the night. Roy trudged back into the emergency room. He knew his mother would be getting worried, so he asked the desk clerk if he could borrow the phone. It rang a half-dozen times on the other end before the Eberhardt's answering machine picked up. Roy left a message saying he'd be home as soon as he and Beatrice finished cleaning up the mess from the science project. Alone in the waiting room, Roy dug through a stack of magazines until he found an issue of Outdoor Life that had an article about fishing for cutthroat trout in the Rocky Mountains. The best thing about the story was the photographs. Anglers wading knee-deep in blue western rivers lined with tall cottonwoods, rows of snowy mountain crags visible in the distance. Roy was feeling pretty homesick for Montana when he heard the approach of a siren outside. He decided it was an excellent time to go find a Coke machine, even though he had only 2 dimes in his pocket. The truth was, Roy didn't want to be in the emergency room to see what the sirens was all about. He wasn't prepared to see them wheel in somebody who had been injured in a serious wreck, somebody who might even be dying. Other kids could be really curious about that gory stuff, but not Roy. Once when he was 7 years old and his family lived near Milwaukee, a drunken hunter drove a snowmobile full speed into an old birch tree. The accident happened only 100 yards from a slope where Roy and his father were sledding. Mr. Eberhart had run up the hill to try to help, with Roy huffing close behind. When they'd reached the tree, they realized there was nothing they could do. The dead man was soaked with blood and twisted at odd angles, like a broken G.I. Joe doll. Roy knew he would never forget what he saw, and he never wanted to see anything like it again. Consequently, he had no intention of hanging around the emergency room for the arrival of a new emergency. He slipped through a side door and wandered through the hospital for about 15 minutes until a nurse intercepted him. "I think I'm lost," Roy said, doing his best to appear confused. "You most definitely are." The nurse steered him down a back corridor to the emergency room, where Roy was relieved to find no chaos or carnage. The place was as quiet as he had left it. Puzzled, Troy went to the window and checked outside. There was no ambulance in the delivery zone, only a Coconut Cove police cruiser. Maybe it was nothing, he thought, and returned to his magazine. Are you guys thinking what I am about the police cruiser? Soon afterward, Roy heard voices from behind the double doors that led to the area where Mullet Fingers was being treated. A loud discussion was taking place in the patient ward, and Roy strained to make out what was being said. One voice in particular rose above the rest, and Roy was distressed to recognize it. He sat there in nervous misery, trying to decide what to do next. Then he heard another familiar voice, and he knew there was only one choice. He walked to the double doors and pushed them open. "Hey, Mom, Dad," he shouted, "I'm right here." Officer Delinko had insisted on giving the Eberharts a ride to the hospital. It was the decent thing to do, and also a prime opportunity to score points with Roy's father. The patrolman hoped that Mr. Eberhart's son wasn't involved in the continuing mischief at the Pancake House construction site. What a sticky situation that would be. On the drive to the hospital, Roy's parents sat in the back seat and spoke quietly between themselves. His mother said she couldn't imagine how Roy had got bitten by a dog while he was working on a science project. Maybe it had something to do with all that hamburger meat, she speculated. "Hamburger," said Roy's father. "What kind of school project uses hamburger?" In the rearview mirror, Officer Delinko could see Mr. Eberhart put an arm around his wife's shoulders. Her eyes were moist and she was biting her lower lip. Mr. Eberhart appeared as tightly wound as a clock spring. When they got to the emergency room, the desk clerk declared that Roy was sleeping and couldn't be disturbed. The Eberharts tried to reason with him, but the clerk wouldn't budge. "We're his parents," Mr. Eberhart said evenly, "and we intend to see him right away." "Sir, don't make me call a supervisor." "I don't care if you call the Wizard of Oz," said Mr. Eberhart. "We're going in." The clerk trailed them through the swinging double doors. "You can't do this," he objected, scooting ahead of the Eberharts and blocking the hallway to the patient ward. Officer Delinko edged forward, assuming that the sight of a police uniform would soften the fellow's attitude. He was mistaken. "Absolutely no visitors. It says right here on the doctor's notes." The clerk solemnly waved a clipboard. "I'm afraid you'll all have to go back to the waiting room. That means you too, officer." Officer Delinko shrank away. Not the Eberharts. "Listen, that's our son lying in there," Roy's mother reminded the clerk. "You called us, remember? You told us to come." "Yes, and you may see Roy as soon as the doctor says it's allowed." "Then page the doctor, now." Mr. Eberhart's tone of voice remained level, but the volume had gotten much louder. "Pick up the phone and dial. If you've forgotten how, we'll be happy to show you." "The doctor's on a break. She'll be back in 25 minutes, the clerk said tersely. "Then she can find us right here," Mr. Eberhart said, "visiting our injured son. Now, if you don't move out of the way, I'm going to drop kick you all the way to Chokoloskee. You understand?" The clerk went pale. I'm reporting you to my supervisor." "That's a dandy idea." Mr. Eberhart brushed past and started down the hall, guiding his wife by the elbow. "Hold it right there," snapped a firm female voice behind them. The Eberharts stopped and turned. Emerging from a door marked "Staff Only" was a woman wearing baby blue scrubs and a stethoscope. "I'm Dr. Gonzalez. Where do you think you're going?" "To see our son," replied Mr. Eberhart. "I tried to stop them," the desk clerk piped up. "You're Roy's parents?" the doctor asked the Eberharts. "We are." Roy's father noticed Dr. Gonzalez eyeing them with odd curiosity. "Pardon me if this is out of line," she said, "but you sure don't look like you work on a crab boat." "What on earth are you talking about?" Roy's mother said. "Is everybody at this hospital a total wacko?" "There must be some mistake," Officer Delinko interjected. "Mr. Eberhard is a federal law enforcement agent." Dr. Gonzalez sighed. "We'll sort this out later. Come on, let's go peek in on your boy." The emergency patient ward had 6 beds, 5 of which were unoccupied. The 6th bed had a white privacy curtain drawn around it. "We've got him on IV antibiotics, and he's doing pretty well," Dr. Gonzalez said in a low voice. "But unless we find those dogs, he'll need a series of rabies injections. Those are no fun." The Eberhards locked arms as they approached the enclosed bed. Officer Delinko stood behind them, wondering what color shirt Roy could be wearing. In the patrolman's pocket was the bright green scrap of clothing that had snagged on the Mother Paula's fence. "Don't be surprised if he's sleeping," the doctor whispered, gently pulling the curtain away. Nobody said a word for several moments. The 4 grown-ups just stood there, blank-faced, staring at the empty bed. From a metal rig hung a plastic bag of ginger-colored fluid, the intravenous tube disconnected and dangling to the floor. Finally, Mr. Eberhard gasped, "Where's Roy?" Dr. Gonzalez's arms flapped helplessly. I don't know." "You know what?" Mr. Eberhard interrupted. "One minute an injured boy is asleep in this bed and the next minute he's vanished. You don't know?" Officer Delinko stepped between Mr. Eberhard and the doctor. The patrolman was afraid that Roy's father was upset enough to do something he might later regret. "Where is our son?" Mrs. Eberhard demanded again. The doctor buzzed for a nurse and frantically started searching the emergency ward. "But he was the only patient here," Mr. Eberhard said angrily. "How could you possibly lose the one and only patient you've got? What happened? Did aliens beam him up to their spaceship while you were on your coffee break?" "Roy! Roy, where are you?" cried Mrs. Eberhard. She and Dr. Gonzalez began checking beneath the other 5 beds in the ward. Officer Delinko whipped out his portable radio and said, "I'm calling for backup." Just then, the double doors to the waiting room flew open. "Mom, Dad, I'm right here." The Eberhards practically smothered their son with a tandem hug. "Little devil," chuckled Officer Delinko, holstering his radio. He was pleased to see that Roy wasn't wearing a torn green t-shirt. "Whoa!" Dr. Gonzalez clapped her hands sharply. "Everybody hold on a minute." The Eberhards looked up quizzically. The doctor didn't seem especially overjoyed to have found her lost patient. "That's Roy," she said, pointing to their son. "Of course it is. Who else would it be?" Mrs. Eberhard kissed the top of his head. "Honey, you get back into that hospital bed right now." "Not so fast," Mr. Eberhard said. "I'm not sure what's going on here, but I've got a feeling we owe the doctor an apology. Maybe several apologies." He planted both hands on Roy's shoulders. "Let's see those dog bites, partner." Roy lowered his eyes. "I didn't get bit, Dad. It wasn't me." Mrs. Eberhard groaned. "Okay, now I get it. I'm the crazy one, right? I'm the raving loony bird. Folks, excuse me, but we've still got a major problem," Dr. Gonzalez said. "We've still got a patient missing." Officer Delinko was thoroughly confused. Once again, he reached for his radio in anticipation of calling headquarters. "Before my brain explodes," said Mrs. Eberhard, "would someone please explain what this is all about?" "Only one person can do that," Mr. Eberhard gestured toward Roy, who suddenly wanted to crawl down a hole and hide. His father turned around to face Dr. Gonzalez. "Tex?" she said, arching an eyebrow. Roy felt his face redden. "I'm really sorry." "This is a hospital. This is no place for games." "I know it's not. I apologize." "If you're the real Roy," the doctor said, "then who was that young man in the bed and where did he go? I want the truth." Roy stared at the tops of his sneakers. He couldn't remember another day in his life when so many things had gone so wrong. "Son," his father said, "answer the doctor." His mother squeezed his arm. "Come on, honey, it's important." "You can be sure we'll find him," Officer Delinko chimed in, "sooner or later." Bleakly, Roy looked up to address the grown-ups. "I don't know the boy's name, and I don't know where he is," he said. "I'm sorry, but that's the truth." And technically, it was.